All right, good afternoon, everyone. Good evening for those joining us in a little bit later of a time zone, and maybe good morning, depending on how far west you are. We're going to go ahead and get started on our webinar today for What Are Your Consumers Saying? An inside look at the recent industry surveys. I would like to invite anybody that hasn't participated in the poll to go ahead and do that now. That will be closing in just one moment. I want to point out one of the ways that you'll have to interact during this webinar, and that is through the question and answers panel. So on the bottom right-hand side of your screen, you probably see a Q&A section. You'll be able to use that Q&A section to pose questions to the panelists or questions that you may have as you're thinking through insights from your guests that we can present to the panelists or provide you answers directly back in the Q&A. So I'd invite you to please use that. So you can select Q&A, set it to all panelists, and go ahead and put your question in there, and that will get it to us, and we'll bring it up at the appropriate point. Next, I would like to just talk a little bit about what our agenda today is going to be. Specifically, we are going to have about 90 minutes of discussion. That discussion is going to be both with some prepared content that our distinguished panelists have put together, as well as the questions that you submit through the Q&A. So this is going to be a community discussion and presentation of some of the best practices that come out of these insights. We would like to know if we have any members of the press that are visiting with us today. So if you don't mind, just in the questions and answers, go ahead and put your name and where you're from. We would also happily invite you to reach out to us if there's anything from the webinar that you'd like to use. We can make sure we connect you to the appropriate panelist that may have some input on the topic.
Hey, and everybody, this is Randy Jocelyn. I'm over here co-hosting today with Matthew Hohenstein. We have some questions coming already, and yes, Alfred, we will be passing along this recording. You'll get a link to the recording emailed to you. We'll actually let you know where the link will be. It will be available on Friday. Our amazing person behind the scenes that's answering the questions is Bill D'Angelo. I'm going to ask Bill to mute his microphone.
Sorry, I thought I was muted.
It's okay, Bill. It's okay. We are living in the age of expect the unexpected, and that mute button doesn't always work. But we will be there answering your questions throughout this webinar. We've got a team here at Gateway that will be taking good care of you. Now, this is a continuation of our Webinar Wednesday series. We started these, some time ago. I believe, Matthew, is this our 9th webinar?
I think it's right about that.
1, 2, 3, yeah. We're moving along. We started on March 18th as really an opportunity to gather together as a community, specifically to the Gateway ticketing community. And then we quickly opened up the doors to everyone because the conversations that we were having were really great for everyone. So we're here talking about what are your consumers saying, inside look at recent industry surveys. And then next week, we're going to talk about how you can generate revenue by thinking differently. We've got some partners that we've been working with that are doing some studies, and they're really going to analyze what types of opportunities are going to be just around the corner as you are trying to recapture some of this lost revenue that your attractions have. Oh, thank you. I got a little, my photo is in the way down here in the bottom. And then on May 27th, we are going to have another webinar. I can't get my face up. There we go. On May 27th, we're going to have another webinar, Best Practices and Learnings from Attractions that have already reopened. And we're really excited and encouraged to see some attractions reopening. We're asking those attractions to join us and share that journey. Last week, we had the team from the Hogle Zoo in Utah share what they were doing. They literally had less than 72 hours to prepare an opening, and they shared some of their immediate successes with us, which was amazing. And as we see more and more people reopen their attractions, we would expect to see some more conversations there. Moving along, after this webinar, if you haven't caught up on all of the webinars and you want to go backwards, just visit gatewayticketing.com/community. You could scan that QR code as well on the bottom right. Another offering that we want to mention today, we're going to talk a lot about guest sentiment, guest surveys, and what you might be doing as a community right now or working within your attraction. If you are a member of the Gateway Ticketing community, next Tuesday, May 19th, 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 noon Eastern, we are going to have a special gathering, like a community town hall, to discuss CRM best practices. You don't have to be using our CRM plus product, but anybody that's a Gateway Ticketing customer can join us. Expect an email with more information about how to register and join us for an hour on Tuesday, May 19th. Quick introductions. This is me. I'm Randy. Hello. I'm going to pass it on to Matthew, my colleague here, who's been joining me on these webinar series for the past couple of months. Hey, Matthew.
Hi there, Randy. Also joining us today, we have IAAPA's Vice President for the North America region, John Hollenbeck. From BVA-BDRC, which is a insight firm, we've got John Young joining us from the United Kingdom. He's the research director there in the United Kingdom, as well as Matt Petrie, the president of BVA-BDRC in the United States. Additionally, we have Steve Mills joining us from the United Kingdom, who's from Decision House, a insights firm there. And then returning to the webinar is Josh Liebman. So he's
I was going to say he has a podcast as well. So yeah, Josh Liebman is joining us as well again. So it's great to have Josh back from Amusement Advantage and the Attraction Pros. And behind the scenes, we have Bill D'Angelo, who's our super amazing 200 words a minute typer. In the background, Bill helps us out answering questions and facilitates any conversations behind the scenes that may happen. So hello, everyone. We're happy to be here. As we typically do, we're gonna have a little bit of an industry update. We've noticed a lot has been happening in the last week. Matthew, I'm pretty excited to hear some of the reopenings that we've been reading about and watching YouTube videos about. So I'm really interested to hear what you have to share about some of these industry openings and updates.
Certainly. So one of the things I wanted to start off with was actually something that one of last week's webinar attendees shared. That was Roxanne from the Pacific National Exhibition. She had shared this really great article about how a firm up in Canada that sells shoes had kind of gone out with an interesting message to consumers that offered them kind of a pay the price you want for their product, their shoes. And I thought as I was looking at this, that this has a lot of merit for attractions, especially those that are in the nonprofit space. You can take a look at this article when you get a chance, but just to boil it down to its most simple, basically they have a sale going on, right? And they're trying to encourage people to buy their product. But they're also allowing the consumers to make a choice on whether or not they would want to take full advantage of that sale, or if they would like to use some of that money that they normally would have, gotten off on those shoes, and instead put it towards a specific cause. So whether or not that's providing PPE to those in need or others in the community that need help. And so I thought this was a really great way to, still have a promotional message, but then potentially give options to consumers to contribute to others' things in your mission. So I think it's really exciting promotion that Vessi there was doing. And I want to thank Roxanne for sharing that. The next thing we had talked about last week was that on the Disney company earnings call, they had mentioned that they will be reopening Shanghai Disney Resort on May 11th, this past Monday, and sure enough, they did. And one of the things that we're seeing is that, as we had talked about and have been for a while, that they're limiting capacity. One interesting thing, that came out of whenever they opened was that all of those tickets for May 11th were snapped up rather quickly. And right now, as of yesterday, whenever you went online, they were actually sold out on full day tickets until May 18th. But I think one of the interesting things, and we had talked about this in one of our previous discussions, was that concept of potentially turning the park and introducing a new round of folks in later in the day. And that certainly appears to be what Shanghai Disney Resort has put in place with this half-day ticket. So that actually is only sold out until May 14th. So Obviously, they're getting some insights, I would assume, that guests are staying for a certain amount of time. They have more capacity that maybe is opening up later in the afternoon. And so they're able to kind of offer two different ticketing options and to maximize the capacity that they do have available. And, obviously, Shanghai Disney Resort has been working on reopening, I think, for quite a bit. They also did a phased reopening. We saw Disneytown, which is their kind of shopping and dining area, reopening first. I believe that's similar to probably what we're seeing now happening at Universal Orlando, where a little bit later this week, Universal City Walk is going to start opening up in a limited capacity to give them the opportunity to stretch their legs and bring in folks into some of those restaurant or shops, as well as to kind of test drive maybe some of that operational procedures that may be new. We did see that when Shanghai Disney Resort opened, that they did open with social distancing very front of mind. There's a great YouTube video that their vice president actually took the media through the park prior to opening and really, illustrated what steps they were taking to help ensure a safe environment for the guests that come. So I'd encourage you to watch that. It goes through several different things, one of them being still having those character experiences in the park, but establishing ways to maintain social distance. So that picture kind of top middle is a street show where Chip and Dale are performing, and there's specific areas that are set aside for each family to stand in. Characters are still going out in the park. However, at this time, they're not interacting directly with guests. But obviously, I believe Disney did share that being able to see these characters brought to life is an important part of the experience. So still having the opportunity for the guests to see them is important while still maintaining the social distancing. Now, one thing I think that some areas of the world obviously have some difference, and that's how much social distance you need to have between each other. In China, I think they're focusing on 1 meter. So it's kind of there at the bottom middle, you'll see they focused really on putting up signs where folks should not be, and then allowing them to fill in the spaces outside that. So rather than telling somebody where they should be, they went out with the option of where you should not be. And each one of those blocks is about 1 meter long. And the last thing I just want to point out, and one of the things that is in the bottom right-hand corner, is that's basically the exit of one of the attractions. And what's lined on each side of that wall of that attraction is hand sanitizing stations. So, in a situation where you've been on an attraction, you've been holding on to a handlebar or, a lap belt, I think, rightfully so, Disney realized that as I walk out of that, I probably need a way to recover from that situation. How do I feel comfortable after that? And making sure that it's readily available of a hand sanitizing station, as, restrooms or sinks may be a little bit further on.
Hey, Matthew, I'm just going to jump in here and say, we virtually watch a lot of attractions at home, and it's one of our favorite things to do as a family, especially now. We have virtually ridden every ride in the world, it seems. And then I was showing my kids and my wife this, and she loved it. Like the immediate response of don't stand here and create that space. I mean, it really resonated with her and our family because that is something that is just really uncomfortable anyway in an attraction when you go and you're in a queue and you're stacked up. And I'm just curious what is going to end up with these types of distancings. I mean, some of them are going to improve the experiences, and really, it depends on the amount of capacity that you're allowing in your park and attraction. Something else that I really took away from this video, which the links are in the bottom right, so I'm sure everyone on the call will be watching it soon if they haven't already, but because the crowds are going to be such limited currently, that in some of the areas they don't even think that they're going to need those queues because the park is so big. I think they were mentioning in the areas for the food and beverage, you might not see the traditional food and beverage queuing that you would have seen previously, just because people are going to be so spread out. That was just an interesting takeaway.
Excellent. I think one of the feedback we're getting in some of the Q&A, as well as I got whenever I had shared some of this on LinkedIn, is social distancing was not necessarily present during the filming of their video. The media, I'm not sure exactly if they had already gone through their COVID-19 testing and were all feeling very good. But you know, in this example of the cast members very close together, it maybe is not as socially distant as we were expecting.
Yeah, and I saw that when you were watching the media crews run around, they were like literally stacked on top of each other to get the perfect shot. But anyway, yeah, some of the videos and reports that we're seeing coming out of China is that it's working, you know, as guests are arriving, and it's really an interesting takeaway to see how that journey is working for them and how we're going to see it here in the UK, the US, and others. Right.
The next thing, you know, we have started to see are attractions that are you know, trying to get their bearings and understand what their guests are expecting. So there's been a fair amount of surveys that have started up, SeaWorld Parks and Entertainment, Universal Orlando, and then one of my favorite attractions in the whole wide world is the Biltmore House. We're starting to reach out and understand what their consumers are thinking. Specifically where we've seen an area of an attraction taking that information and using that was with Six Flags, who had done some surveying of their attendees and then had basically leveraged that data to understand what their reopening plan was going to be. So there's an article here in the Los Angeles Daily News that shares some of that information, but I highlighted a couple important bits there. You know, so half of the Six Flags pass holders and members that they surveyed said that they would visit the parks today if they were open. I think that, you know, we all feel that there is a little bit of pent-up demand right now, and I think that certainly pointed to it in the Six Flags group. About 80% of those surveyed said they would visit Six Flags parks in 2020 if the company implemented health and safety measures. So making sure that those were, you know, with that caveat, that's what seemed to make folks feel comfortable to come back. And then, you know, Six Flags used that to detail plans to address the concerns of their consumers. You know, the surveys indicated that pass holders and members would feel comfortable returning to Six Flags if they implemented, you know, capacity management or only operated at 25% of normal capacity. And one of the top findings was sanitization, there we go, was a really top priority for their visitors. So,
hey, Matthew,
yeah,
Matthew, I'll tell you, we're struggling as a family saying the word hand sanitizer all the time. So we just say sanitizer, and it's a good abbreviation. So you almost tried to say it there as well. But yeah, I'm seeing the same thing too. And I think first and foremost, the big takeaway that I'm seeing in all these reports is that the overtly expressions of keeping the guests safe and providing sanitizing solution everywhere in probably places that you never have done it before. I think when you were looking at that exit queue, to see hand sanitizers on the exits as you're walking and exiting a ride or an attraction, we've traditionally seen them in restrooms and in food eateries, but now we're starting to see them in all kinds of different places. And a lot of the conversation we're going to have today when we discuss sentiment is going to bring that back. And Josh is going to share some of his insights about what's the number one thing we have to do. And a lot of us understand it because we as consumers outside of the attraction space are seeing it as well. It's the first thing I want to do. I'm very conscious. I feel like I have to use my sanitizer all the time, you know, because every time I go somewhere, it's just first and foremost on my mind. And we want to be a community that helps customers feel safe and enjoys themselves while they're at their attraction. So I agree that was a big takeaway that I got out of these all of the learnings and openings. You know, I want to switch gears a little bit, Matthew, if you don't mind. I'm really, really excited to introduce John. John Hellebeck is the Vice President North America for IAAPA. And John, you actually do so much. IAAPA does so much for the community. But I'm looking at a list of people that are joining us today, and a lot of the attractions I'm seeing, they're probably not IAAPA members. So do you mind just introducing yourself, saying hello, and sharing a little bit about what IAAPA is and what IAAPA is more specifically doing right now? I'm amazed at all the content that's available, not just for members like like many of us, but also for non-members right now during this time period. So I just want to give you, 4 or 5 minutes to just talk about what IAAPA is doing for everyone right now.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. It is a pretty busy time for us. We're all learning how to work out of our houses because we're all still at home. Although here I'm in Orlando, Florida, and we've just been released from our stay-at-home order this past week, and things are starting to open up a little bit. So getting a little bit used to that, but I'm becoming a Zoom, WebEx, Ring Central, you name it, expert these days, because we've been on a lot of calls, to say the least. But there are really a lot of things that IAAPA can do for people. I'm pretty sure most everybody participating today is aware of what IAAPA is, but in case you're not, we are the Global Association for the Attractions Industry. We basically, in my words, try to become the glue for the industry to help maintain good communications and connections with our members. IAAPA members are not just theme parks or FECs. We also are students, individual members, and we do have a lot of manufacturer and suppliers. So, we cover the gamut of the amusement industry. And then really, IAAPA 100 plus years ago was founded as more of a safety organization. As industry started becoming more technologically advanced and safety was a big part of what was needing to be there, we definitely were trying to do what we could to make sure that people understood that it is a safe industry. And that continues 100 years later plus. But that's not the only thing that we work on. We do a lot of things with connections. Typically, we're involved in a lot of events and do a lot of event planning and have people come and visit our events as well. So, we're as much trying to see what we can do to help attractions start to get open, because that means we can start doing some of our events too. We do a lot of things in relation to bringing people together and having connections and other things. But I just wanted to kind of talk to people a little bit. I'm not certainly trying to create this as an IAAPA membership, recruiting portion of the area. But if you are involved in the attractions industry and you may not be an IAAPA member, there are certain benefits that you can get typically of being an IAAPA member. But as Randy mentioned, those are all open to everybody right now. We have a lot of things that we're doing to be able to kind of tackle this COVID-19 crisis and kind of move forward in that direction. And one of the things that we're doing right now is on our website, which is IAAPA.org. You can go on there, and on the top bar, there's I believe it's a big orange bar that says COVID-19 resources. You can go there, and actually we have quite a few resources that are not just for North America. I may take care of the United States and Canada in the job that I do, but we have 4 regions throughout the world that really takes care of the industry on the entire globe. So we have Asia Pacific region that the home office is in Hong Kong, and there's also an additional office because we have so many members and people in China, in Shanghai. We have our European, Middle East, and Africa offices in Brussels, Belgium. We have our Latin American office in Mexico City. And then North America, I'm under the same roof in our brand new building that IAAPA has in Orlando, Florida. Now you might be asking, well, why would the Latin American office be in Mexico City if that's part of North America? I'm actually more North America because I just take care of the United States and Canada. So a lot of things I'll talk about really have a slant for the US and Canada, but all of these resources are available around the world, and there might be a little bit of differences. I've listed a couple on the slide that you see now, Canada and some United States resources, because those are the ones that I've been actively involved in. And you can go and click on any of those orange boxes and get to your region and be able to see direct resources that affect you and the location you may be at around the world. We really try to create and have an environment where we have the most updated information. So what we'll do there is make sure that we are changing things out. If there's a new legislation or something comes around that really triggers the need for updating, we'll put that information on there. Another thing that we offer is we've just put together a reopening guidance document. And really what this is, I mean, you can read the 3 bullet points that I put on there, but it really is a foundation to be able to let facilities, let municipalities, let organizations and associations in states and regions be able to have a basis to say, we can safely reopen our attractions and our businesses by following some of these guidances. And this is really a way to kind of create just a checklist, maybe, if you want to call it that, to make sure you're thinking of the correct things. It's very generic in general. We don't try to get too specific into how you do things. Just because here in the United States, we have 50 different state governments, and most of our reopening restrictions are placed on a state level. So we're not trying to create a one-size-fits-all plan. We're just trying to give some guidance to be able to let people pick and choose what they need to make the plan for their state or their local authorities make sense. This isn't something that IAAPA just puts together. We have over 6,000 members worldwide, and most of those members have put a lot of time and effort into creating this reopening guidance document. And it is a worldwide document. This is not just a North America document. So there have been people in collaboration from people all over the globe to put this together. And really what we're trying to do is focus not just on what the employees are going to do and people to be able to tell their government officials what they can do to be ready to reopen, but also what responsibilities they may need from the guests and from employees to be able to reopen, because it is kind of a two-way street. You know, a lot of Matt was talking about in Shanghai Disney with, you know, we have created these boxes and places you shouldn't stand and things you shouldn't do, like maybe touch people's shoulders or other things. But, you know, it really is all about creating an atmosphere where visually you can see something that should happen, but it really is up to the guests and the employees to make sure that those policies and procedures are upheld. And, you know, you can just do as much as you can, but I think we're starting to live in a little bit different time. I was watching a TV show the other night and two people hugged each other or something, and I was like, they can't be doing that. So, I mean, I've already got my mind programmed that, you know, this is a different world that we're living in. So this reopening guidance is just a way for people to take a look and give them some insight to be able to, you know, formulate plans to be able to move forward. A lot of things we're doing here in North America, Randy, if you want to go to the next slide, is really advocacy. We do a lot with IAAPA. That's kind of a second pillar of why IAAPA was formed, not just the safety side of things, but we do a lot of advocacy with government officials to be able to be a bit of a voice for the world, but especially here in the US, for legislation to make sure the attractions industry is heard. We've sent multiple letters to both sides of the Congress, the House and Senate, as well as to the President and Vice President, from our CEO and President, Hal McAvoy, just reiterating the importance of creating legislation that is beneficial for the attractions industry. We do a lot of things on a state level. If you are an IAAPA member, you're probably, and you are in the US, you're probably getting emails from me or our advocacy team at least once a week talking about various ways that you can help to advocate, to consider, you know, ways that you can tell your government officials, whether they be Congress or state officials, how to act and react in order to try to, you know, push our ideals forward for the attractions industry. The IAAPA Grassroots Action Center, which you can see on the logo down below, and then the Join Now. If you go to that part on the website or on the web and just put in IAAPAaction.org, it goes to a place where you can actually sign up. You put in, this is basically for our US members, but you put in your zip code and your address, and it will automatically populate your officials in your locality or your state or in federal government, and you just click a button, and then basically you've now just sent a letter or an email to those officials asking for certain things. So that's something, if you are in the US, you can certainly join up and just help get the word out to our local governments. So a lot of things we do on the governmental level, and, you know, to try to advocate. When we're not in COVID-19 crisis, we'll look at things like usage of drones. We look at federal programs such as minimum wage, preventative work schedules, et cetera, to be able to make sure that, you know, we're just creating a voice for the attractions industry and making sure that we're heard. We have worked in the COVID-19 crisis timeframe with a lot of other associations, whether they be US Travel, Hotel and Lodging, the Restaurant Association, et cetera. So there are a lot of people that we're working with, as well as state and regional associations like New England Association of Attractions, California, Florida, Texas, all over the Northeast, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. We're working with all of these organizations to have a common voice to make sure the attractions industry is heard. We talked a little bit about connections and education. We have a lot of stuff that's going on there with webinars, Facebook Lives, newsletters. Of course, our Fun World magazine comes out each month, and there's a lot of information that's out there and a lot of ways that you can connect, even though we can't do it face-to-face, unfortunately, right now. But it gives a lot of information on how you may be able to ready your attraction for reopening once it does get reopened, how you may be able to increase revenue, etc. There is an IAAPA webinar tomorrow that unfortunately has been sold out already because we're getting a lot of great response talking about food and beverage. So as attractions come back on, what they can do in their food and beverage programs to ensure a safe and enjoyable environment for all the guests. We've put together also on, if you've heard of Workplace, we've put together a couple exchanges in North America and in Canada to be able to have a discussion, via a social media channel. So if you go to Workplace or if you go to the IAAPA.org website, you can find a way to sign up for that, and then you can get put into those. Lastly, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the challenges. I talked a lot about what we're doing, and this is really the reason that we're doing those. A lot of information you're going to hear today is talking about guest perception, about when it's okay to go to attractions or to visit places or to get out. Really, that's a lot of the work we're doing behind the scenes. As you can see, I just put up the cover of the Reopening Pennsylvania document. That is kind of a tiered effort that's been put out by state government saying that these certain businesses can open at these certain times. And we're doing what we can to look at these documents, take the information we have from our members, and really go back and say, we feel that, and I'm just making an example up, in Pennsylvania, you're putting attractions as a tier 3 attraction, as a tier 3 element. We believe it can be tier 2 because here's all the things that we can do. And then we can go back to that reopening guidance document and say we can, safely queue people. We can keep people apart from each other. We can sanitize and have hand sanitizer and sanitization. There, I said that.
Yeah, you mixed it together there. That was
Thank
really
you.
good.
Thank you. I've said that a lot lately too. But a lot of policies and principles put together to be able to allow our attractions to reopen again. So that's a challenge that we're seeing by a lot of our members. They're ready and want to reopen, but they're just being held back because of maybe some government restrictions. So we're trying to help on those. I'm sorry, Randy, you have something?
I would say, yeah, actually, I want to stop there for 1 second because we actually had a couple questions come in. And Nell, who's in Arizona, wants to know, do you guys have a list of what states are opening back up? And is there a resource that is available that we can go to see what each state is doing specifically?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a moving target. What I would suggest is whatever state you're in, if you are in the U.S., if you go to your just state government page, typically that resource, we don't necessarily put all of these state reopening guides into our resource center because it would just get very big and very hard to keep track of what's the most recent. So I would just suggest go to the state that you're in and check out the government page. And for some reason, if you don't find what you're looking for, my email address is also on the IAAPA.org website. If you just go into the North America area and just send me an email and say, hey, I was looking for the Arizona document. I was on with the Southern Arizona Attractions Alliance the other day where we were talking, and they had some insight and some information, and we're working on a document of their own. So if you're not finding something, you can just send me an email. It's on the screen right there. And I'll get back to you as soon as I can, or have somebody on our team get back to you. But there's so much information that's coming out there. One other issue that I did want to bring up, just is one that's been very pertinent, is just this issue of liability. All the things we're doing and everything we're trying to do to get attractions open with all these policies and procedures can bring about some issues of liability. Obviously, you're opening your attraction, you have hundreds or thousands of people at your attraction. If somebody does get ill and then claims that they got ill at your facility, obviously you want to be able to cover yourself or have some plan to be able to know what happens from there. A lot of states right now are working on some liability protection regulation. They've passed a bill or a law, now it's a law in Utah, to be able to cover that if anybody claims that it was because of that and it wasn't due to, gross negligence or whatever, that a business would be covered and not be viewed as liable for someone having a sickness, as long as they were putting these policies and procedures in place. So that's really one of the big things and one of the challenges we've been helping to work on. So the big three, if you look at it from me, kind of to wrap up a little bit, would be where these attractions are in their state or local government regulation as far as when they can reopen. We're trying to really fix and push on that. Trying to get new legislation and new programs. I'm sure everybody, especially if you're in the US, and I apologize if you're not from the US, I keep going back to that, but there are 3 pretty large pieces of legislation that have been adopted into law to try to help, either whether it be employee retention tax credits or payroll protection programs or small business administration loans. There's another program that's being discussed right now in the House of Representatives called the HEROES Act. Unfortunately, Senate doesn't come back into session until after Memorial Day, so there probably won't be very much debate or anything happening until maybe the June timeframe. But the HEROES Act has another set of asks, and IAAPA has been very active in making sure that any of those asks that could include provisions for the attractions industry be included. So I know it's kind of a lot of heavy information and doesn't necessarily focus directly on guest perception, but everything we're working on behind the scenes is to try to get our attractions open so that they can be safe, people can enjoy them, and then we can continue to see those guest perception numbers for being able to go and visit attractions continue to rise. And that's really why we're here.
Well, actually, and John, you're wearing your IAAPA hat right now, but we'd be remiss if we didn't say that, you have quite the experience in the attraction community. So as we go on, we might ask some questions for you to put on your operator's hat. I mean, you've worked at Universal worldwide. You've worked in the Middle East. I know you've been in Hollywood and the Asian market. So as an operator, a lot of what you mentioned resonates with me too. A lot of what you kind of talked about is really about regions and focus on sentiment. And I think that's what I really am excited to get into a little bit. IAAPA is at the forefront, along with many others, in helping to craft the narrative of what we need to be doing as an industry. And when we talked previously, we all got together and we kind of talked about what the sentiment is amongst everyone. There's this word of caution, right? If you're an attraction, you're cautious because of some of the liability position. If you're a person like Stacy Buckley, Stacy, you had mentioned, hey, I'm not going to be the first one you work in an attraction. I know you do. You're in Georgia, but you're one of the ones that you're not going to be the first one to rush in and go to an attraction. I really think it's important to look at what our guests are thinking and then how we can help craft a narrative. So, John, your insight is great. Now, you did mention a little bit about North America. I will let everybody know we did have a little bit of a poll. A good amount of our attendees today are from North America. So this is data from you. So 85% of us today are from North America, with 3%. Well, actually, I would say 5% from Europe and the UK, Canada, nearly 10%, and some other for a few percentages.
So actually, Randy, in my region, if you add Canada and America, we're up into the 90s. So that's,
yeah, so it's definitely
most everyone.
But we wanted to understand who was on, because a lot of the conversations are going to be taking perspectives that are in the UK, because there's an interesting understanding of like the shift and changes, and I'm pretty excited to pass this along to our friends over at BVA-BDRC to kind of walk through some of what's going on in sentiment. So I'm going to pass it off to John and Matt. Why don't you guys share a little bit about your findings, and then of course we're going to have enough time to open up some Q&A and have some real rich discussion after we present some of this information.
Great. Thanks, Randy. Yes, so Matthew and I were going to share some findings from our weekly tracker. So for the last 7 or 8 weeks, maybe a bit longer, in the UK, we've been speaking to the UK public just to understand really what their sort of their sentiment is currently. And Matthew in our US office has been doing something similar with slightly fewer waves. So I'm not going to dwell too much on the data because hopefully it's quite self-explanatory. Matthew and I are going to interchange. But so this first chart here is just a general question we've asked the UK and the US public. And that's just really to understand what their perceptions are on where they are in the crisis. So, do they feel the worst has passed? Do they think the worst is still to come? So in the UK, we've seen quite an interesting trend. So generally, the consumers have become more positive week on week. You can see the green increasing week on week, and the red decreasing. The majority now feeling, the worst has passed. But I think there's a few interesting elements that we can take from this chart. I think the first one is the improvement over time, which I've just mentioned. The next one is that sort of, I think that's quite large yellow yellow bar, which sort of looks at the fact that people are sort of still think things are going to stay the same. And we'll see this in a few of the other insights we're going to share, that people in the UK, it feels like they're sort of bedding in. A big proportion of the population just saying, right, actually, things are going to stay the same for quite a while. Probably going to stay in my house, maybe go for a walk, do some other basic activities, but not do anything more adventurous. And I think the third point on this was that this week we've seen our first uptick in the proportion saying the worst is still to come. First uptick since we started the survey. And those of you who sort of dial into UK politics, you may have sort of seen Boris Johnson presented to the nation on Sunday, talking about next steps, and the reaction to that was quite negative. And obviously we're not going to be political here, but the general response has been that it wasn't very clear, and you can see that in the data. And obviously for attractions, that means people are unclear on what they can do. Matthew, I don't know if you want to talk about the US a little bit.
Well, the US, just briefly in the US, you can see a different trend over the past 4 weeks. Obviously, we haven't been doing it quite as long as we have in the UK, but through the middle of April to the first week of May, you can see really a back and forth between the worst is still to come. Part of that is the virus itself. Another part of it is this realization of what's happening with the economy. So there's two factors going on there. But one thing that's clear is that over these 4 weeks, consumers are not necessarily confident that the worst that the worst has passed. You can see statistically from the red bars here, those are statistically significant fluctuations. In other words, in April 22nd, you had half the U.S. population approximately saying the worst is still to come. That actually improved or went down to 37% last week of April. But in May, there's a number of things that happened in the news between that time. One in particular I won't bother to mention, but I think everybody knows about it. The negative perceptions went back up to 46%. So again, in the U.S., it's very much more in that the worst is still to come. Not all negative. It's still a little bit less than half the population. But again, it would be interesting to see these numbers change over the next several weeks, especially as we start getting into the summer.
Hey, Matthew or John, can I ask you, is age playing anything into this? Are there areas that are a little bit more depressed in kind of their outlook on it, and that would be important to understand?
Well, just real quick from the
you go, Matthew. Yeah.
Okay. From the U.S. perspective, basically you see Gen Z, which are consumers 18 to 22. They tend to be a little bit more pessimistic. We don't have a chart for it. And then boomers, those who are 55 and above, also tend to be a little bit more pessimistic, but not significantly so. But you will see in these charts, or I'll speak to them, older consumers, boomers, are significantly more cautious, and there's more anxiety in what they're likely to do, and there's more trepidation in terms of getting outside the house. There's a lot more worry with those consumers, those who are classified as boomers. Millennials, in contrast, and they're aged 23 to 39 to 40, they can't wait to get out of the house, and they're less concerned about health. and those sorts of issues. But I'll talk about it as we get through the different parts of the deck. But in general, the mood relative to these, the worst is still to come, et cetera, does not vary significantly by age. It also does not vary by where you are in the U.S. We have this broken out by the 4 regions within the U.S., and they're essentially almost identical in terms of the West, the Midwest, and the East Coast, et cetera.
That's a great ad, because I think Bill Dale was just asking that as well, because I'm in Tennessee and I know some of us are in Texas. It is interesting to think of what people are thinking. And in a state like Tennessee that's open, the sentiment amongst my neighbors is like, oh boy, we might have opened up too early. There's no data that supports it, but there's this underlying little bit of a worry that maybe certain folks are not adhering to the social distancing, and I think there's a worry about that. So when you bring up millennials, that's what I see. I see these certain age groups that are maybe being risky. But then, of course, I'm seeing others like boomers in my neighborhood that are staying on their porches and staying away. So it's happening right on our doorsteps, and I think it's happening, and it will happen as we see these attractions reopen.
Yep.
On the age in terms of the UK, could we go to the next slide? I think there's quite an interesting one on that.
This slide,
So I won't go into detail on this slide, but just to sort of summarize it, it basically looks at people's sort of feelings in terms of their own sort of financial situation. So that if we look on the left-hand side, we've got at the top those who are lucky. They're actually better off than before, and those are people who will have saved money on childcare costs, transport, impulsive purchases. I know I've saved quite a lot on not getting my lunch out every day. And you've got those who are all right, and the virus hasn't really affected them. Then you've got those who are cautious, but they're okay. And then you've got some that are impacted, currently the minority. But going back to the age question, I think this is what really interests me in the UK, and I think it applies across. I think it applies internationally as well, in the US too. So if you look at the empty nesters in the top right, so you can see that they are far more likely than any other life stage, and empty nesters being those who are 65 and over with no children at home. They're much more likely than any other life stage to say that they are either one of the lucky ones, or financially the coronavirus pandemic hasn't really affected them. So we already know that before the crisis, this audience had more time. They're predominantly retired. They're very active, and they are a little bit more wealthy than other life stages, and they're less affected financially by the crisis. So we've got this interesting, I think, paradox at the moment, where we've got this audience who have more money, more time, but they're also a little bit more fearful of contracting the virus. They're more likely to fall into vulnerable groups, and more likely to be impacted. So I think, one of the big challenges for attractions now, the UK and the US, is how do we entice this audience into the attractions? How do we reassure them that, they will be safe, that things are in place? Maybe how do we make them feel special? I think most people below that age group will actually empathize with this age group. So perhaps they won't mind if the empty nester group are given priority or given special treatment. In our supermarkets in the UK, certainly people in that age bracket and maybe a bit older, they're told they don't have to queue. They can walk into the supermarket without having to queue. And there's an understanding of that. So I just in terms of the age group, I think there is a paradox, but I think it's really important to get this audience confident in visiting again. Otherwise, we're really going to lose out on potential income.
Yeah, and to what extent, what type of experience does it have to be? I think I mentioned this actually I didn't mention this. For Mother's Day, we went to a drive-through zoo safari, and my wife had the greatest time ever. We got out, but we felt good about going out because we still had that element of safety because we were in our vehicle. But we did venture out. We went to the gift shop and we went to some places, and we saw a locale that was taking good care of us. They were doing the things that we expected them to do, and thus we were able to have a really good time. But we're certainly in that big middle section there of families with children that, yeah, we're cautious. We don't want our kids to get sick. We feel like we're in a good space, but that's really going to be a huge community that we need to have positive sentiment. We're moving forward.
And I guess there's these empty nesters who have grandchildren as well, so those two groups do cross over. So in reaching out to the empty nesters, you're more likely to get those families going as a unit, and most likely they'll want to reconnect, having been sort of being apart from each other for the last couple of months through social distancing.
Yeah.
One point on that from the U.S. perspective, the U.S. mirrors very much what you just saw in the U.K. chart.
And I think this is a good slide, Matt. I want to talk a little bit about this, Matt and John. Like, this is, there's this optimism. It's kind of wavering week to week right now, but there's this underlying kind of, everyone kind of understands that this is going to be different for a pretty significant period of time. And that's kind of the sentiment, and that's what this data really supports. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it kind of shows, I mean, I don't want to put too much of a negative slant in it, because obviously we're looking for solutions here as well, but it does show the sort of negativity and the points I made earlier about people bedding in a bit. And if you look at the charts at the bottom of this slide, you can see that the proportion expecting normality by July just keeps on going down week on week. This year keeps on going down week on week. So, there is a real challenge on, trying to sort of create confidence, as we mentioned on the previous slide.
And you guys both, you guys provide a lot of data and studies for lots of different industries, and I really want to talk a little bit about the sentiments about traveling as well. So I traveled a couple hours away, but what's the likelihood that people are going to visit other places? And I would like to contrast and compare UK numbers and US numbers here about, are people going to travel this summer? What are your findings about, are we going to see people hitting the road and having an overnight or two overnights, in the future here?
Well, I'll quickly talk about the UK, because I know there's a lot of US people on the call, and Matthew, you can talk a bit more perhaps. But in the UK, the proportion anticipating a UK vacation is a lot lower at the moment for the summer. So there is a lot of anxiety in the air, and we've been, I think, pretty effective here. The government's been quite effective here in communicating that people need to stay at home, probably more successful than they were hoping. So really the challenge here is to kind of reverse that, and probably didn't do a very good job on that on Sunday. But yeah, so at the moment it's really looks like it's going to drop, and I guess until guidelines make it clear that you can do things, then it's not really going to change anytime soon. Matthew?
Yeah, and I believe it's this slide here just shows you the percentage of US versus UK, and what percentage of the population who, for example, on the left-hand side, wants to go to a visitor transaction or attraction, and those who want to go to a museum or cultural venue. You can see on the left-hand side that more Americans, about 35% of them, anticipate going to a visitor attraction in the next 3 months. So there's no baseline data for this to compare what would be under normal circumstances, but that gives you a sense of just how many consumers who want to do that activity, actually, that's the timeline they put on it. It's substantially higher than the UK at 22%. If you look over to museums, you see about a quarter of consumers who want to go to museums can see themselves doing that in the next 3 months versus about half that in the UK. So Americans, just in contrast to Brits in this case, or have a shorter timeline for those who want to engage in that activity. But it's important to point out that the gray part of this chart. Over on the visitor attraction, about a quarter of Americans just can't put a timeline on it. They don't know enough, either where they live or about the attractions and when their opening dates will be, and as you'll see later on, what the venue is going to do to make sure that their visit is safer. And that's one thing that is higher for both visitor attractions in the US than it is in the UK. especially when you look over to museums. About 40% of those who want to engage in a museum visit or cultural venue just can't put a time on it because they really just don't have enough information. They may want to do it or be very motivated to do it, but it's more of a question mark in the U.S. about when, and then also for the venues, what they're actually going to do to make things safer. And
Matthew, go ahead, John.
There's one other chart that's down about U.S. travel, which is just to John's point. If you go down, I think a couple slides, I could just talk. Here we go. Perfect. Here we've been tracking in the U.S., and this is only the U.S. When consumers plan to research or plan a U.S. vacation, and when they plan to book a hotel, two key indicators of just when consumers plan to do something. So you can see here the planning of a U.S. vacation. There's been ebbs and flows in the overall data here. You can see in the middle of April about 1 in 10 consumers saying wanting to do it in the next month. That doesn't really change that much in the first week of May. It's still about 1 in 10 intending to plan their vacation in the next month. Looking at booking a hotel accommodation, the same sort of trend. It doesn't necessarily sustain any gain and hasn't necessarily continued to go up week over week. So we're thinking that also with the gray bar up there at the top, the level of confusion or just lack of clarity on when things are going to open up, and also not only what venues will do, like visitor attractions, but also what hotels will do for people when they do travel. How will they make the experience at the hotel more safe and especially for older consumers, more comfortable or more at ease? So clearly, I think this chart says, at least in the short term, going through the summer or the early part of the summer, and most likely to the end of the summer, fewer of your visitors will be coming from further afield. It's going to be mostly your local visitors that are going to be coming to your venues. And there'll be some pent-up demand for that because it is local and people haven't been able to travel. But those people who want to travel, I just don't think anywhere close to what the patterns were before are going to happen anytime soon, simply from this data here. We're not seeing any movement on short-term travel planning or actual intent to book a hotel accommodation moving at all in the past month.
So Matthew, that's interesting to understand kind of, hey, we're not seeing folks getting more excited about this yet or ready to. Like the conditions probably haven't improved that have given them that confidence yet. However, it is somewhat promising in seeing that, about, 35% of folks were thinking, hey, I'm gonna do this in the next 3 months. So having those kind of ideal thoughts. This is probably one of the questions you get asked a lot of times because we think anybody that has, this research has this crystal ball. Like, do we know how much of this truly is going to materialize, or is that something that's kind of an unknown at the moment?
Well, I think at this point, you look at the numbers for the U.S. and visitor attractions and say that a third of the population that wants to do this activity in this case wants to do it within 3 months. That's a positive number. But still, you need to balance that up by a quarter of consumers who just don't know when they can actually do this activity. So the more that an attraction can communicate their opening dates and what they're doing with reduced capacity or increased health measures of social distancing to put people at ease will help consumers make that decision and actually go to these venues. And I think also, and we've talked about this, the panel before, your first customers that come back are most likely to be your most loyal customers. And those customers, once they actually do get to your venue, they'll be telling their friends and their relatives, and also probably encouraging their older family members or friends to come with them the second time, or just tell them that it's okay to attend. I think that's really that's very, very important in this first wave of consumers that you have come, that they understand and they experience the additional measures that you're putting in place to improve the experience.
That's great. Thank you, Matthew. So we did do a poll to kind of see, of the folks that are attending this webinar, kind of how do we compare? I think that we are in the attractions industry, the majority of us, we know kind of the intense focus we put on safety. And so I think while there's not a ton of us ready to run out in the next 30 days, but we do feel that, hey, within the next 2 to 3 months, we think that the attractions can get their arms around this. So I think we're probably a little bit off the average, but I think that's indicative of kind of our knowledge, and we just need to figure out a way that we give all of our guests and those that are looking to visit us that same level of knowledge and safety. So I wanted to ask John and Matt if you could share a little bit of what are the things that are going to help give confidence to those folks that are going to visit attractions? Like, what are they saying?
Actually, we have a chart, I think, that's below this. Here we go. Both from the U.S. and from the U.K.'s perspective. I'll just summarize on the U.S. side. You can see number one, we basically summarized the top 5 conditions, and the question was quite simple. And which, if any, of these conditions would need to be met before you personally would consider visiting in the U.S. a visitor or a museum, or in the U.K. a visitor attraction after the lockdown has been lifted? And you can see number one for both countries, and very, very similar. Just having hand sanitizer is something that's very important. That's just that confidence that you at any point in time can cleanse yourself, so to speak, of any sort of experience you may have or interaction with others or objects. You do see outside of hand sanitizer, you see enhanced cleaning regimes. And again, that's probably not what the public necessarily sees, but you need to tell them that. And you also see consistently, and see down at the bottom there, enforced social distancing. A lot of consumers are saying they also want to be able to see, like you showed, Matthew, in the beginning, the little boxes or things that basically help people stand away from each other. And that's very consistent across both countries. And last thing I'll mention here, on average, there's a number of these attributes here, but there's on average over 4 of these sort of conditions or policies are what visitors expect a venue to enact before they actually visit again. So an average of 4, but when you, again, to emphasize that with older consumers, when you look at boomers, they actually want an additional 2 more conditions. In other words, they have an average of 6 conditions they want to be met before they visit versus the overall average of 4 for all consumers. So again, just to emphasize how much communication of what you're doing and communicating across 3 different key areas: cleanliness and the hand sanitizers and the enhanced cleaning regimes. What you're doing to enhance social distancing is very important. And then the sort of protective policies you're putting in place. So if you are requiring people to wear masks, state that, show that, or if you're encouraging people to do it. Those are the 3 key sort of categories that visitors are expecting venues to implement on their next stay or their next visit.
That's great. Thank you, Matt. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Can I just add one thing on that? I think in the UK it's pretty much pretty comparable. So I won't dwell on the individual elements, social distancing, cleanliness, the key 2 factors. But I think one thing I will add as well, which is a general point, is that I think we need to sort of keep in mind, that we are visitor attractions and people visit us because they want to have magic memories, they want to be excited, they want to be inspired. And there is a danger, I think, if we sort of overplay the social distancing, overplay the sort of cleanliness things we're putting in place, that becomes almost a sterile experience, and you lose that sort of incentive to experience something magical. And maybe if the visit starts to become a little bit off-putting. So I do think it's really important when we communicate that we have to have a balance, so people are actually excited to visit. Maybe they won't be made to feel guilty that they're within a meter of somebody else. And I think there are other ways. And also I think there are some people who don't like being told what to do. So there may need to be more creative ways of doing some of these things. We talk about nudging behavior. Many of you will be familiar with sort of painted footsteps leading to a bin, for example. But perhaps there are sort of creative ways of sort of ensuring that people do wash their hands or use sanitizer, that they do keep 2 meters away. Perhaps we can gamify some of these things for the children, so it becomes a game that they sort of wash their hands every 2 minutes, or they follow a trail to a sanitizer or something like that. And so I think the broad point is, it is really important that we sort of keep hold of the fact that we are visitor attractions, which create positive memories, not just the sort of sterile atmosphere that you may get in a hospital or a supermarket, but aren't quite applicable for the attraction.
I think that's a really good point, John. I know that in the United States, we have very mixed feelings, right? You know, I want my freedom. I want to feel safe. So I think those are the really good ways to make sure that we balance that because we have everybody that's visiting our attractions. One of the questions that had come up a little bit earlier on was, one of our attendees, Stacy, was kind of surprised to see the focus on sanitization, especially at folks that might be just, the first ones to emerge and go to a park. Why do they care about sanitization? And I'll share my thoughts on that, but I'd be interested if anybody else has a different opinion. We kind of are getting a little stir crazy. We're tired of being inside and we want to get out. And right now, the information that I have is that, hey, I need to make sure that I'm clean, that I'm not transmitting stuff from myself to someone else or vice versa. And so I think that we're just looking for those tools to be out there for us that allow us to live in this world that's a little bit different. And so while I want to get out to a theme park as soon as possible, I also just want to have that safety net there that's very close by, that I know that I've been on this attraction and I know that I'm going to probably touch my face because I don't have enough discipline to keep my hand away from it. So how can I make sure that I'm clean and that I've been able to sanitize? So I think that's also kind of what's driving that.
Yeah, I would agree, Matt. This is John from IAAPA. But I would also say that, we deal a lot in the attractions industry with rider responsibility, whether it be you need to have proper seating on an attraction or you need to, do things that are communicated via signage or graphics. And I think a lot of it really has a lot to do with optics too, is if people feel like there is policies and processes in order to keep people safer, that they have the ability to have a safer experience. It can't guarantee 100%, but all the tools are there to be able to create a safer environment. And it really is a bit on the guest or the customer to, follow the rules and do what they can to ensure that there are those safe environments being put together. And I think a lot of times just having something there, let somebody know, hey, this facility has a plan. They're working through it. They can maybe get a little more information via communication and use that to, increase their enjoyment of the situation. And I agree a bit with what John was saying. We don't want to create this, where you have the character at your theme park is wearing a mask all the time because it's, just to try to create that vision. It kind of loses a little bit of the magic, if you will. But I'm also sitting in my normal TV viewing room instead of my office right now. So, I think people see that there are differences going on in the world right now, and that pent-up demand is there. And I'll just share a quick story with you. Is my wife and I took our dog to Clearwater Beach, and we stayed in a hotel for 2 nights last weekend because the beach is open, and that beach was packed, but it was packed full of people that were staying away from each other. I saw a lot of businesses, whether they be gas stations, restaurants, whatever, having policies and procedures out, and people were distancing there, and they were handing out paper menus and single-use, plastic servettes instead of silverware, et cetera. So a lot of things are changing, and a lot of people are reacting to that. But I'm certainly one that does want to be careful and make sure things are safe. But I will put myself into a position where as long as there are precautions there, I'll do what I need to do to follow the rules and enjoy myself. But, we had a great weekend, and I'm still here today.
That's great. Thank you, John. So we wanted to jump down. So what Matt and John had shared with us was kind of, these regions in kind of totality with a little bit of a focus on tourism. I want to ask Steve Mills from Decision House. He's really kind of been diving into attraction-specific insight for ALVA. And Steve, maybe you could help us to understand a little bit what ALVA is and then share some of your work with us.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Matt. Yeah, I mean, I've been working at Decision House on some public sentiment research on behalf of ALVA, which is the Association of Leading Visitor Attractions in the UK. So it's the body that represents all visitor attractions and their interests across the UK, ranging from a wide range of different organisations, from organisations like the National Trust, who have 300 heritage and landscape properties across the UK, English heritage, a whole bunch of about 100 properties across the UK as well, to huge attractions like the Tower of London and Kensington Palace that we've all heard of, whether we're from the US or the UK. So we've been doing some work on their behalf, looking at public sentiment in particular towards, with the aim really of trying to build trust and confidence to inform what is it exactly that the visit experience needs to look like, and what sort of language do we need to be talking to potential visitors in order to build that trust and confidence. So similar to some of the things that John and Matt were talking about, but specifically on the looking at visitor attractions. So I can take you through some of these key takeouts that came from the first wave of this sentiment research, which was between the 20th and 24th of April, so a couple of weeks ago now. So if you want to skip through to the first point, and I can begin to talk some of these things through.
Oh, sorry about that.
No worries, no problem at all.
I was paused on my screen, so they were not popping up. So there you go.
That's fine, no problem whatsoever. So I think as we've already begun to talk about, really, that the market, certainly in the UK, and I think by the sounds of it in the US as well, is highly cautious overall. So in the work that we've done for ALVA, if we had to characterize it, we'd say something like about 20% of the market will be happy to go back to attractions as soon as the opportunity arises. So really quite small. And then you've got about half in the middle that are saying, well, let's wait and see what happens for a short while before we take that leap and go and visit. And then you've got a very nervous about quarter or another 20% or so who at the moment are saying, actually, I'm unlikely to visit for a long time. People who are saying, actually, until there's a vaccine, or at least I'm very confident that this virus has been beaten, then I'm not really going to venture to an attraction at all. So, I mean, the key thing really is about how we then overcome this caution. That's what everybody wants to know at the moment. And I think that one of the key determinants in the UK, it really does focus around how well we are perceived to deal with fears over crowds and our actual ability to implement and, importantly, really importantly, to police those distancing measures on site. So I think one of the things that came out of this research that was really interesting was it's not just about having set routes around an attraction, or it's not just about having online booking only. It's about making sure that when visitors arrive, the staff there are being seen to actually police what's going on. So I think, as John mentioned earlier, one of the issues in the UK at the moment is within supermarkets of people are very comfortable with the measures that supermarkets have put in place, but what they feel less comfortable about is the other visitors. So they trust the staff, but they don't trust the other visitors. And I think that's the danger in visitor attractions as well, is that we see some great work that visitor attractions are going to be doing in order to put these measures in place, but they need to be confident that the visitors are going to obey those. So being seen to police those distancing measures, I think, is really, really key. So those first few weeks are going to be absolutely crucial, of course. So we mustn't be seen to be getting it wrong. So it's all about social proof here. So once people see in the first couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, that it's okay, it's safe to go out, the virus hasn't spread again, and that attractions are getting it right and demonstrably getting it right, then that will build that confidence. So all those attractions need to take time to get it right. In the UK, there's talk of a kind of a universal kite mark that ALVA are trying to put together to give people confidence that an attraction has put in specific measures recognised by the public health authorities over here to say, yeah, it's fine to visit. These attractions have done as much as they can. And these are some of the things that they're talking about. We've talked about a lot of these already, really. So things like limiting numbers of visitors on site at once is clearly key. Culturally over here, in the UK, I'd say that it's less common than it is in the US to have online only booking. So today, for example, the National Trust, who are this organisation that have 300 sites, have announced that they are going to be going towards an online booking model in the short term, and that's a huge step for an organisation like that has 5 million members across the UK. So they're going to be putting that in the next couple of weeks. as I said, it's about being seen to implement and police those distancing measures. It's not just paying lip service to it, it's being seen to be actually doing it. There are some, frankly, facilities that people are more anxious about visiting than others. Cafes over here, particularly indoor cafes, people are very nervous about visiting, and play facilities as well. One thing that people have been suggesting over here is as well, can we be more flexible on providing picnic facilities in the short term? That will encourage people to get through the door in the first place. Okay, you're sacrificing the short term in terms of secondary spend, but if it's getting people through those doors, then it's worthwhile considering that. And we've talked a lot as well about hand sanitizer. Obviously, it's kind of one of those order qualifiers. It's going to be one of those things that people just naturally expect to have. Over here in the UK, PPE, I think it's more of a polarizing issue. It's still in the majority in terms of a measure that people will be expecting and gaining in confidence. But you've got about a quarter of potential attraction visitors over here that are pushing back on PPE, particularly if it's compulsory for visitors. And that's particularly a case with the older generations as well. And then, yeah, moving elements outdoors wherever possible is going to be critical. We've obviously got the additional issue over here during the summer of unreliable weather. So that's not always going to be possible, but organisations can be doing that wherever possible.
I'm glad you I'm glad you brought that up too about the PPEs, because Malcolm did have a question about our organization planning on enforcing those rules about requiring guests to wear PPE, because here you've got a guest that wants to enjoy your attraction, they're at your door, they're willing and able, yet maybe there's a policy that says, no, you can't, you have to wear a mask. We're starting to see some videos in certain areas of people that aren't compliant, and it creates a very uncomfortable situation for the business or the attraction. So that, it sounds like you're echoing that sentiment that some attractions are specifically saying, hey, we're not going to require it. Yeah.
I think that's right. I mean, I guess one of the differences over here is we are, I guess, much more government-led over here. And one of the announcements that the Prime Minister over here made on Sunday was recommending, actually, this is coming back to what John was saying, how confused it was, but it was kind of wear a face mask, but don't wear a face mask because the National Health Service need it, so wear a face covering instead. So it's kind of a bit up in the air at the moment. But I suspect one of the things that visitor attractions are going to be asked is try and encourage your visitors to wear face coverings when they first come and visit. So yeah.
Yeah, that's can I just that positivity. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
Just to jump in on that, just because we asked a question about face masks in the last week's survey, and the question was, which of these conditions would make a visit to an attraction so undesirable that you would not visit? And visitors wearing face masks was the number one. I mean, it was only 27%, but you know, clearly it's so different to your normal visit. So I think, yeah, going back to the point I made earlier, that there is a danger that might put some people off.
Yeah, I think that's right, and it's a cultural barrier that we're going to have to get over in the UK. Certainly, there's no culture of wearing face masks in the same way that there is in the Far East.
Well, and I'll come back to you in 1 second, but I do have a slide that I want to show. Josh did a research study in the U.S., and I'm looking at time to make sure we cover everything. But Josh, he did find some really interesting studies, and really the most important thing to increase comfort from your experience, Josh, was that customers needed sanitizers and masks, right?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So yeah, this is basically kind of the quick snapshot executive summary of the research study that we recently did. This was from April 23rd to April 29th, where we asked about likelihood to return to specific attraction types. And Randy, like you mentioned, this was primarily in the US, a little bit in Canada as well. We got about 2,000 responses. And yeah, when we asked them about, you know, what sanitation modifications would you expect to increase your comfort and to increase your likelihood of visiting attractions? The primary ones were making sanitizer and masks available, at least. So definitely a little bit of a distinction there between masks available and masks required. And so having masks be available for guests was one of the top responses that we got, along with hand sanitizer.
And obviously, I would say that some of the term there to visit attraction might be that discomfort of being in public, or maybe even just discomfort being around people that, you know, could have it. But so Steve, I'm going to go back and forth because I think a lot of your findings work back and forth. Steve, we have to have a real positive outlook here to make sure that your visitor-facing guests, and we've talked about the first wave of people coming in, those most loyal guests, they're going to expect your staff to really be welcoming and meeting them where they need to be met. So that might be wearing all the PPE and other aspects. I'd like you to continue, Steve, and share a little bit more of these key takeouts here.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the key things that came out of this work is particularly that, yeah, that visitor-facing staff have a hugely positive role to play here. So, but having said that, it's going to be a more challenging role than perhaps they used to, because they've been used to welcoming people who are coming in, feeling relaxed, looking to have a great day out. There's going to be perhaps that additional anxiety that people have now when they're walking through the gate. So providing that warm welcome and putting people at ease, and in particular showing patience with visitor concerns, is going to be incredibly important. So there's a definite training need in there as well, and it's going to kind of be learning on the job, I think, in the first couple of weeks, and there's going to be a lot of hopefully sharing of positive experiences in there. And you're going to, frankly, certainly in the UK, going to get rude people who are not wanting to follow the rules, not following these social distancing rules. So there's going to be perhaps a need to push back, a pushing back role for staff as well. So they're going to have to be perhaps a little bit more proactive in those areas, but being confident that for every rude person that they might encounter, there's probably going to be another 20 people listening into that conversation who are appreciating what they're doing. So it's about staff having confidence to do that as well. And then associated with that, really, we're talking about pre-visit communications with the public being vital as well. There's been, I suspect, in the US as well as the UK, a trend for virtual online visits during the lockdown, which have gone incredibly well over here. There's been some fantastic examples of for example, people going to sit in their cars and going on a zoo safari, a virtual zoo safari from their own cars in their own driveways. Is there a way that we can use that increasing trend for virtual online visits, perhaps demonstrating how that social distancing is working on site, how those measures are working in practice, even perhaps live webcams of how it's actually working on the site in practice? Because that's the fear, is that, okay, you've got these policies in place, but are they actually working? And then any messaging around creating perceptions of these physical open spaces. And that doesn't just apply to outdoor places, it can apply to indoor as well. So that I know there are 1 or 2 museums who are working on completely reconfiguring their shops to give the impression of greater physical space, so that they will encourage people to go into the shops when they're worried about this distancing issue. We've talked already, I'm not going to cover that much about older visitors. It's an interesting one in the UK. I think they're among the keenest to come back. So they're a lot of the ones who are saying, yeah, I'll come back with the soonest opportunity, are older, but actually they still need the most reassurance. So there is that paradox, as we've been talking about, in terms of they're the ones that are going to be perhaps turning up feeling most nervous. But again, ending on a couple of positives, really, there's certainly evidence of some increased altruism in the market. So certainly in the UK, there's a general recognition that visitor attractions are struggling, and some won't come back at all. So they need some help, and I think it's potentially a good time for donation asks. Altruism is quite high at the moment, and certainly visitors are not expecting blanket price discounting at all in the UK, from what we can see so far. And then finally, there's some positive opportunities perhaps of membership as well. So current members are feeling particularly altruistic right now. Again, it might be a good opportunity to ask them. And in the UK, it's going to be a great time for recruitment. We've already talked about how visits, there's not going to be a lot of overseas travel from the UK this summer, probably. Although there is talk of Europe trying to get together with some kind of reciprocal agreements with the UK. But there's going to be a lot of public remaining in the UK this summer, so memberships is a great opportunity to sell them, perhaps with some additional exclusivity benefits. So all the benefits that perhaps are less valued at the moment, so things like priority booking or member-only days or member-only access to indoor places, they've been undervalued, and now they're going to be much more valued as you know, online booking only becomes the norm. So actually, there's some really good opportunities for people squeezing as much as they can out of their membership this year.
Well, Steve, a lot of what you talked about, we've heard from previous webinars and I've shared, but we've seen some great success stories about just asking for money, right? The altruism is there, and maybe specifically with that community that you had already mentioned is wanting to come, but they're just not going to come. So they've got this, they're cautious, they're the boomers, you know, they don't want to go out, they want to come, but that might be the best people to have an altruistic call to action. You know, hey, we know you're sitting home, you can't wait to open up. Please come and visit us when we're ready. We've got this great program for you, but in the meantime, help us out. And so we are seeing that there's some really good information. I like this slide. I just want to throw it up there to make sure that we all got a chance. And something else, we've got a couple other questions, but I do want to send it over to Josh too. So I'm going to bounce around. When you say that we need to positively welcome people, I actually want to go back to this one slide just for a moment. You mentioned a little bit about the difficult guests. And I think Disney Shanghai really kind of jumped on this. This is a really good, non-intrusive way to say, hey, I'm here. You got to get a little bit of distance. It's probably what might become the model. The one problem we have is we can't see the smiling face, but maybe we're going to recruit people that can smile amazingly well with their eyes, right? But it's certainly something I would expect to see more and more.
Just put smiles on all the face covers.
I have seen that, John. There are some people that have the clear ones and then the smiles on the face covers. I think that's probably the way it's got to be, a big smiling face and let people buy them. There'll be, probably a donation. If you're a locale that needs donation revenue, you could, sell those masks. I'm going to switch gears, and I really we'll probably end here. We're going to go a few minutes over, but Josh, I love your key findings here. Now, you have a very unique group of people that you surveyed, and you mentioned over 2,000 people. These are our attraction visitors in the U.S. Is that right, Josh?
Correct. Yeah, throughout the U.S. and major markets in Canada. So yeah, it was our large pool of mystery shoppers who are regularly visiting attractions, whether it's on behalf of Amusement Advantage and conducting mystery shops, or just generally visiting with their family as well. So best way to put it is people who would be visiting attractions on a regularly anyway, COVID aside.
And this is great data because I got to tell you, when we were building this panel and this webinar, it's really hard to get direct data, right? We would love to have Six Flags sit right here and say this is everything, but we're not seeing that. We're not seeing the survey data from actual attractions for the most part being shared. So this audience here that you're mentioning, Josh, is probably the closest we could get to that audience. So I'm going to let you share a little bit. This is a question that you always ask.
Yep. Yeah, so this right here, I'll give you just a quick intro into what this is presenting, and this is pre-COVID data. So this right here is a small piece of our most recent fund rating report. It's an annual benchmark report that we put out that really measures a number of different factors that guests are experiencing. So this right here is, when we have one of our mystery shoppers, they complete a mystery shop, we ask them a series of questions as far as their perceptions on a number of different factors. And one of the things that we say is, based off of this experience, on a scale from 1 to 5, how likely are you to return to this attraction? And, it's based off of, that previous visit that they just took, and 1 being, least likely, 5 being most likely. And so this is what we collected really from January 1st through December 31st of 2019. So as we can see, zoos are at the top there, and then it kind of goes down from there. But for the most part, it paints a pretty good picture, of the industry and of likelihood to return based off of the experience that we had. With the research that we just did recently back in April 23rd to the 29th, where we collected those 2,000 responses, we asked them what their likelihood to return is within the next 3 months, and we asked for each of these specific attraction types. So it's really interesting to see this juxtaposition here broken down by the different facility types as far as what the likelihood to return was like in 2019, pre-COVID, and now what it's like, with COVID being that factor as far as when it reopens, how likely are you to visit within 3 months of reopening? So here we're able to see that, zoos are still very much on top there. Museums, are pretty strong as well. Obviously, there's a decline in every segment of the industry, but then cultural attractions is also pretty high up there too. And that pretty much considers things like botanical gardens, maybe historic sites, sightseeing cruises, kind of in that cultural standpoint. And what's really interesting is if you look at this and kind of break it out from attraction types that are traditionally nonprofit, so zoos, museums, aquariums, the majority of cultural attractions, and then on the flip side of that, attractions that for the most part operate as for-profit businesses, so amusement park, water park, FECs, bowling, trampoline parks, that there's definitely a little bit of distinction between the two, that the scores in general are higher in the cultural tourism, zoos, museums, aquariums area of the industry versus amusement park, bowling, FEC, and trampoline park.
Josh, that's amazing, good data, and I think it mirrors what Steve was saying about the altruism call right now, right? There's a good opportunity for folks that are an attraction that cannot reopen just yet. Obviously, there's the likelihood to return to a zoo. I think the open air concept really helps us understand that, I can go to a zoo. But I was actually most surprised to see some of the locales drop so much greater than the other, or the types of attractions. And I'm a water park guy, and I'm heartbroken because in my head, water parks, if I'm going to go anywhere, I'm thinking I'm going to go to a water park because if I'm going in the water, I'm pretty comfortable thinking that the chemicals are going to help me keep safe, right?
Right.
Hey, Josh and Randy, do you see that maybe it was the CDC guidelines that came out originally had said it was not safe to go to a water park? That's since been changed recently, but do you think that may have had some effect on that?
Certainly could have, yeah. There's definitely a lot of external influence that I'm sure drove these perceptions and these rankings. So it's quite possible.
Yeah, I feel that way too. I would love to look at the timing about this, and I think that's why what I wanted to get out of having everybody here is that we're all in this community together, and we need to help shape the narrative, right? The narrative is, it's okay to be cautious, and these are all the amazing things that we're going to do. We look at Steve's research, and he's like, if you do these things, you're going to help build upon the sentiment that's already there. We're going to help move the needle. And I know we talked a lot about the UK, but I feel like there are so many regions in the U.S. that are mirroring that sentiment in the UK. And John and Matt, you might agree. You guys same team, work in different cities, but the reality is that some of that sentiment is here regionally, and in other areas it's a little different. And I think locale plays a lot into it. The numbers of attractions that you might have, and then what your government is actually doing right now. What are they saying, and how are they opening? So it's really interesting to put all that information together. I am going to show one more slide because I want Josh to speak to this. So Josh, this is kind of one more, this is that data I think also kind of spread out that shows the polarities here, like the absolute. I'm probably not going back to the most likely to go back. So why don't you just give us a quick mention to this?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is basically just kind of a different presentation of the previous or of the same question that we asked, as far as how likely are you to visit each of these types of attractions within 3 months of reopening. And this really highlights the ones and the fives, so those polarized extremes. And looking at this, again, with zoo on top there, 44% of our respondents were most likely to visit a zoo within 3 months of reopening, but they were 51% least likely to visit a trampoline park. So kind of cross-referencing, each one of those right there. Another thing that's highlighted well in this chart right here is, again, if you kind of look at those clusters of the for-profit and the nonprofit types of attractions, again, traditionally, obviously, there's nonprofits in kind of the tourism area and for-profits in the cultural area, but traditionally being nonprofit and for-profit, that you can kind of see, zoo, we mentioned that open air, mostly open air facility, mostly outdoors at the top of the whole list. And then even if you look at kind of that bottom half right there from amusement park downward, that amusement parks being at the top of the list there from the traditionally for-profit types of businesses. Again, most likely because it's based off of it being a primarily outdoor venue, which is why we probably, again, kind of going back to what John mentioned as far as, what the CDC said about water parks, maybe that did result in water parks getting bumped down a few rungs there. And then everything else is primarily, for the most part, indoor facilities. And then we asked them as well, and I'll try to be as concise as possible because I know we're a little bit over the designated time. But we said, if you are least likely to visit attractions within 3 months of reopening, what's the primary reason why? So this is where I actually like to say there's a little bit of good news in this, that the largest response we got at 27% was that they marked this as not applicable because they do plan on visiting attractions within 3 months of reopening. And then if we look at just the two primary reasons why they wouldn't is that discomfort. So one, as far as being discomfort with sanitation procedures at attractions, but even a little bit more so, discomfort with being in public in general. So I say when you're looking at your communication and now, what you're putting out on social media and through email marketing and any of that, to really be highlighting on the discomfort, that we know that there's this fear, this anxiety, and what it is that you are doing to be able to alleviate that discomfort with the sanitation measures that you're putting in place. And then it's also worth noting that, yes, finances are definitely there. It's definitely an issue. It's definitely, making a dent in this chart here, but it is notably lower than any of the other factors. So the financial impact, of course, we're all going through that aspect of it right now, but it's not the primary reason why people are not going to visit attractions.
Yeah, great information. Well, we're almost out of time, and I have a lot of questions that I wanted to ask as well. But I'm going to end this with Steve. Steve, this is a question I wrote down myself. I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this. But some of the folks that are still on, maybe they've never surveyed. Maybe they don't know how to survey. They don't know how to start. What is the most effective way to quickly develop a survey? What are the 1, 2, 3 things that they have to do right now if they are contemplating creating a survey?
Think about what your audience is, first of all. So at the moment, it seems like the easiest audience to go to is those who are your existing customers. Obviously, so they're going to be the ones that are coming back first.
Yeah.
They're the ones who are going to be most valuable for you. And it's frankly the easiest lot to get to at the moment. You've got your own databases there, those who've booked with you. So just do something among them to start off with, because they're going to be the ones that are most valuable to you in the short term. And whatever, there's numerous cheap online tools out there that you can use for surveying, as we all know. So you can do this for next to nothing and very quickly. Great,
good information, awesome. Hey, everybody, we're out of time, and I appreciate you all very, very much. If you use our Galaxy product, join us next Tuesday. We're going to talk a little bit about Galaxy dashboards and how we can put together a very quick survey. Ask some quick questions, kind of maybe doing, Steve, what you just said. Using the data you have, send a little bit of information out, take the data, and read it, right? So we're going to talk about that. If you have tickets, you have member data, you can get a lot more data just because you have that data already. So please join us if you're a Galaxy customer next Tuesday, May 18th. Is that date right? Sorry, I think I had it right previously. Next Tuesday, not the 18th, the 19th. Also, join us next Wednesday on our webinar series. If you're not getting our emails and you're not getting invited, please email marketing@gatewayticketing.com. You can register for our newsletter at gatewayticketing.com/community. Our webinar next week is going to be about revenue, and we're really excited about sharing with you some revenue options and opportunities. And then the following week, we are going to have our reopening strategy seminar webinar. On behalf of Gateway Ticketing and Matthew Lowenstein, who had to leave, I want to thank John from IAAPA, John and Matthew and Joshua and Steve, everybody. Thank you guys so much for helping out today. We really appreciate you. We will have the webinar up and available on Friday for you. So
thanks, Randy.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe. Happy openings for all those that are just about to open. And if you have any questions, let us know, and we will pass it along. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.